Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of QQ. This is going to be a discussion on Paprika. I'm Paul Weston. Storm McLaughlin. Oh man, I really do hope you're on that side. Um, um, if you haven't seen the film, please stop this discussion. Go watch it. It's most certainly worth your time. Um,
Spoiler, Paprika saves the world.
Yeah, basically. But yeah, so I think I've given you enough time to stop in and go and do so. If you're going straight from the discussion, you haven't seen a review. A very brief synopsis of that is that I gave it an A, Torin gave it an A. We both loved it, especially sort of its sense of energy, and you basically have to hate films or really actively try not to like this film in order to not like it, which is sort of a rare thing.
Which is apparently possible.
Yeah, there.
They sent me a reviewer on IMDb who was just terrible.
Yeah, it was. I like. There was one or two people that I found online that was like, "Oh, I really don't like Paprika," and I was sort of like, "That's someone could hate this film. I don't. How? Why?" And I actually
Yeah.
sort of actively looked for people that didn't like it, and the only things that I really found were people that were I felt just trying to be cool by not liking it, or basically saying things that are just sort of objectively not totally true, or at least kind of unfounded, or extremely subjective. That being like, I don't like hot dogs, so hot dogs are stupid. And you're like, well, that's
Yeah.
not really great analyzing, but okay.
I
Like,
think the film, like, it admits of those sorts of responses because you actually do have to do some work if you want to talk about it in depth, you know? And to talk about the way that the animation relates to the themes and how it's written and any sort of narrative sense, you actually have to do a little bit of parsing and some people aren't ready to do that, I guess.
well,
I'm not sure I'm ready to do that in terms of this film either. There are
yeah.
things I think that we can talk about outside of the themes and how the characters work themselves out and how the narrative is structured, which quickly becomes very difficult. That really highlight the importance of animation's place in filmmaking today, you
Mhm.
know,
Yeah.
and
Well,
its relation to live action films. Yeah.
yeah. Well, that's a discussion that Tony and I were having. Is like, uh, can this film only exist as an animation? And we kind of talked off camera for a brief time. Like, you know what? Yeah, some of these cuts are accessible to live action. If someone's like desperately trying to make it work as a live action film, sure, they probably could. But like, first of all, I just financially, I think it would be terribly inefficient.
Yeah,
Um,
schlocky and stupid looking in live
yeah,
action.
and not only that, but it just wouldn't have the same energy, appeal, endearing sort of sensation. And um, I think that's what I'm actually really curious as to what this book was like. Because remember, Paprika was based off of a novel.
Is
Um,
it a graphic novel or was it strictly like text?
you know what? I don't know. I didn't check that. My thought was that it was just a novel, but because I usually mention like graphic novel, whatever, when you sort of take a look, it
Yeah.
would make a lot more sense if it were a graphic novel. But this film feels like it exists so perfectly in its particular medium, not just as a film but also as an animation. Um, a quote that I really like, and I think it was Spielberg, but it might be totally someone. It might be somebody completely different. It might be Kubrick actually, that says like, um, trying to adapt a book or some other uh, piece of art into a film. If it's at its peak or its sort of fullest potential at that medium, then it's going to be a bad film because that artist has used every element that could possibly work in a novel, in a graphic novel, whatever, that each sort of individual artistic medium has to make it as good as it can be. And he says that's why you should find novels or stories that have a really sort of interesting element but haven't been sort of fleshed out completely in that particular medium. And that's why, getting better adaptations, or you can get a really good adaptation. I feel like that's without reading the novel, I feel like that's probably what Satoshi Kon did, because like to its highest level, I don't know, like these, like even watching the first 60 seconds and then the title sequence, there are so many different scene transitions or sort of reveal of information moments that are just so beautiful, that would look so dumb even with the highest level of sort of like film
Yeah.
recording that you have now in live action. It just wouldn't look as pretty, if nothing else, and sort of not real, but I don't know what's the word I'm looking for.
Well, I mean, real is probably a good way to say it.
Yeah.
I'll just use one transition as an example. Paprika is being chased or is chasing someone in a dream sequence, and to escape or to lead them on somewhere, she vanishes behind a figure, or at least you think she vanishes behind a figure, but what she's really done is miniaturized herself to appear on the graphic box on his T-shirt. So she's just, boom, inserted herself in that different plane of reality. And one of the ways that these transitions often work is through like a technological device, like onto a screen, through a screen, the viewfinder of a camera, or any sort of like mediatized place, an image on a T-shirt, any graphic or any sort of visual frame that you can think of as a different perspective, an image, a frame within a frame. They play with it, and it would be so silly in live action to see people like whoa diving into the TV screen.
There's like another one where like she runs and jumps again. She's being chased, and she jumps into a painting and then turns into a sphinx, right? Like, and she actually like melds into it, and it's just like that wouldn't work, right? Or like you could make it happen, but it wouldn't. Yeah, I need a better word than feel real, because like we're talking about literally like hand drawn paintings and that sort of thing. But I think the biggest thing that I really like about animation filming, or animation over live action, is that whereas live action things in the frame, like the mise en scène and stuff like that, the world needs to feel like fleshed out, and like the cuts kind of have to almost make sense, sort of in a chronological sense, or in a sense of timing. Whereas with a lot of animation films, and especially in Paprika, so much more of it can just be visceral, and it's just a guy runs into a hallway. He starts running, and all of a sudden, the hallway starts turning into a rug, and then like he starts running, and the entire background all of a sudden turns into this like flubby, like piece of paper that you can't run on, right? Like, you know what that scene I'm talking about in particular, right?
Yeah,
like,
absolutely. It's a recurring dream that the one character has,
right,
about a murder that he's investigating that also ties to like his ambitions in earlier life that were unfulfilled. Yeah.
And like I'm assuming the people who are watching us have also watched that film.
Yeah.
Right. But like that I get the feeling. I know exactly what the filmmaker is trying to make me feel. Is that sense of like hopelessness and inability to, like, no matter how hard I'm trying to run, I can't do it. And like sure, there are different ways to do that in live action. But with animation, it feels like there's so many more tools accessible to the filmmaker to show it on a very visceral level and a visual level. Sorry, whereas like sort of, and that's really honestly sometimes the easiest way. I remember also a very particular sequence in the film where they start talking about how the dreams are sort of turning into like this one collective dream. And then there's just a shot outside of the window, and you see the tears as she's the rain, as she's talking about how dreams, like, one finds another, and then it kind of leaks into each other. The filmmaker and the animator can actually control the raindrops, so the raindrops meet into each other and then turn into this one particular raindrop. And it's basically showing you exactly what she's talking about, but on a visual level, right? And like, yeah, on a live action film, usually the most accessible way is just to have a character and a usually clever dialogue say how they feel, right? Like, I feel like I'm running in a hallway, but as I run, the background turns into a poster and I can't run on it, right? It's just animation. It's just like, well, fuck, let me just draw it,
Let's
right?
show it. Yeah.
Exactly, right? And like that's always what they tell us is like show, don't tell, and it's just with animation, it's just so much easier to do that. Um,
So it's a very accelerated experience in that sense because whereas in a live action film, these effects are possible. You can set the scene, but it has to be by different means. There are certain things that just don't work visually, or if they do work visually, you have to take a lot more time with them,
mm,
right? And so then they become less of like a texture of the film, and they have to play more into they have to become stronger components of the film, of the themes themselves. Whereas this one, you can really overload it with images that refer outwards and refer among themselves to all sorts of connections and that you don't have to necessarily follow up on because you can just reel them off so quickly. And so the texture of this film, you can do similar things in live action. You can play with dream states and reality and like the connection between the two and the way that affectively you feel in dreams being represented in the real world, like some sort of pathetic fallacy moment with the raindrops sort of thing. That's still achievable on film. You just can't. You don't have all the options available to you in terms of framing. Like you can't just like zoom out, conveniently have the raindrops meet on the windshield. It's not as easy, right?
yeah,
And so your choices are limited by those, and you tend to think of grander moments to use them for. Whereas these ones, they just like it's surface level. Yeah, exactly. So it really creates like I think a film like this would be incomprehensible to to audiences 50 years ago.
Yeah.
That's not to say that surrealism in art, even though I don't think this is a surrealist film, we talked about that for a minute, is there's all sorts of disorderly conduct and chaos and stuff in literature and film and sound experiments of the early 20th century, and people are used to being disoriented in certain ways, but this film uses tropes of filmmaking as narrative frames, to basically just play them off against one another at a rate that's so accelerated. It could only have come in like 2006,
Yeah.
or at least the late 20th century. I don't know.
Well, like let's continue this sort of discussion of sort of live action versus animation. If you've seen the film Paprika, you've probably seen the film Inception, and you could probably tell like there are literally like like when Ellen Page touches a particular wall and it falls and clashes whatever. That exact frame happened 4 years ago, or before it. Sorry, in Paprika.
Christopher Nolan's so busted.
Yeah, and like he says in interviews, I believe that Paprika was a very clear inspiration, and they do talk like sort of in different sort of aspects of dream making or dream sort of jumping and so on and so forth. But Paprika was definitely sort of a grandfather the idea of Inception in my mind.
Yeah, I think it raised it. It probably built the house itself, and like raised the animals and vegetables itself that provided the food for the table and probably even threaded the clothing and everything of the children that Inception represents.
Yeah. Well, like even like there's so many different images, and like even the hallway that I keep mentioning, that I think is Kogawa that runs through sort of continuously. That looks very similar to the hallway that Joseph Gordon-Levitt like fights in, right? Like, and I don't think Christopher Nolan's trying to hide the fact that he loves this film or he was inspired by it or whatever. But like honestly, when I put up the review or like the little thing on Facebook, I'm gonna be like, "Want to watch the film that inspired Christopher Nolan to make Inception? Watch this one." Like,
exactly.
That's exactly what I'm gonna say, right?
Yeah, it borrows very heavily.
Yeah. But the one thing that I kind of wanted to bring up in particular that I thought was sort of different between these two films, and hopefully Torin has some stuff to sort of talk about as well, is the rules of the world. And so like I tend to use that phrase a fair amount, especially with my friends, but hopefully I'm pretty sure I say it fairly often on QQ as well. And more often not, like what rules of the world are is like a film basically sets a set of usually unspoken rules about a world. And so, if a person hides in a bush, and like is staring at the person, okay, it makes the rule like, okay, generally when someone's hiding and they stare at somebody, they can't see them, even if it's, they should be able to. Okay, fine, that's a rule of the world. But if a film suddenly has someone hiding in the bush, and then all of a sudden, without moving or making sound, all of a sudden the character sees the other person and goes, I see you, all of a sudden it's broken its own rule of that particular rule. And that's usually where we become, where we feel the stories, the writer has sort of made it convenient for them, and or they can made the sort of the acceleration of the plot convenient. Um, so generally, we try and like once the rules are established, you try and either manipulate them in a clever way to bring up another plot point or trick the audience, whatever. Um, but there's usually two ways to kind of deal with it. In Paprika, more often than not, I'm not really sure what the rules of the world are, but I believe that the filmmaker and the main characters do. Uh, and the reason I usually don't totally know what the rules of the world are is that the filmmaker just did it. He had a character go disappear behind someone and suddenly show up on their shirt, and then have that character suddenly run into the camera, which then became the new frame. And it's just he kept doing these certain scene transitions, um, and had Shiva run down a hallway, and then when a particular bar disappeared, she turned into Paprika. He did that many times before in different scenes before, so I was okay with it. Right, that was a rule that was set. Okay, fine, I'm fine with it. Um, and the way that Inception does it is sort of different, in the fact that Christopher Nolan always has a character explain why something happens, or like we're explains exactly where they are, because like in Paprika, sometimes you're like, am I in one person's dream? Am I in another person's dream? Or this person awake? And they never really explain it, but that's again another one of the unwritten rules of the world. Is like, I'm not gonna explain anything to you. I'm just gonna do it. Whereas it's like Inception, once they started explaining some things, they all had to explain everything, or it became sort of this anomaly. And then that's when we start having those, like when you watch a film, you tilt your head, being like, I don't know if I totally agree with that, or that feels different. It's usually when they've broken those rules.
Right.
So I'm just curious, like if you thought you had sort of similar experience with that, and like whether, yeah, I was just wondering if you had some experience.
I mean, I have a few things to say surrounding this issue. I just have to say that it's reminding me right now, all of a sudden, of a thing that I did 2 years ago at UBCO. I went to like a textual editing and modernism, like a sort of institute or conference type deal. And there was a guy that gave a presentation. His name's Gentry Sayers, and he teaches at UVic about what he calls boundary objects. And so these are pieces of technology that, when they're introduced to the public, they're so revolutionary, they need explaining. And so the way that they get explained is borne out through the content of what's run through them. So like there was this one radio program, The Shadow, with Lamont Cranston, that happened in the very early days of radio, that actually calls attention to like the technological conditions of its existence. So coming to you from these electromagnetic waves, and it's kind of this spooky thing. We're here, we're in the living room with you, and so it's like this new sense of presence that gets mediated by the technology. And I think that Inception is doing the same thing in some regards, to call attention to new possibilities in filmmaking and CG that simply were not available to us. As much as 10 years ago, you couldn't have a street of Paris fold itself on itself in such a realistic, like awe-inspiring way. It's one of the most awesome moments I've seen in cinema ever, and I will remember it for a long time. And I'm sure that in 40 years, maybe if I make it that far, and I have kids or something, and the things that are going to be going on in film will be even more meta and that sort of thing. But there's always this need to like introduce to you the possibilities of the technology that the story is being told with, that I think the live action has a responsibility to negotiate. And I think that animation has less of a responsibility to do that. Maybe because it's connected to like manga tradition and or just animation like on the comic page, on the page of comic books or graphic novels. Like I was just reading Black Orchid by Neil Gaiman, and I can't remember the illustrator, which is awful that I don't. But they do transitions in the same way. Like there's like a swirly scene, there's an explosion, and things are swirling around in the atmosphere. And the next scene, they're sort of swirling a little slower, or you get the sense, and then they're sort of cloudy, and then it zooms out, and you're inside a beer glass at a pub, and that's the transition, right?
Yeah.
And so these things exist already in graphic format in non-animated media, and I think that because of our familiarity with that, you don't have to do the same thing in Paprika as you do in Inception. So I think that's a really interesting point to note. There's not much more to say there. As far as the rules of the thing go, they collapse, like dream reality, collapse into each other in progressively more interesting ways. And then ultimately Paprika, who is the character you have faith in as somebody who knows the rules of the dream state and who can negotiate basically however she wants. She can run back and forth into people's minds and out of their minds and lead them in directions they never thought possible, until the end when the dreams sort of invade reality and she has to confront herself and sort of make a new rule, you know?
Yeah, that's
so
when that's when we start to get a little bit
dovetail pretty well.
Yeah.
Like the technical aspects of the film and the themes on the whole. I don't know. Yeah. Sorry, I'll let you talk. That was a big long spiel.
No, I'm just curious, yeah. I guess I generally just am more of a fan of Paprika's sort of doing style over Inception's telling style. And Nathan, another guy that does QQ fairly often, although not recently, one of the things he had an issue with Interstellar, and especially sort of in its third act, without ruining too much, is like there's something very particular that happens, and it's totally out of this world and crazy. And he said he just wanted to like, don't explain me what's happening, just do it. Just by trying to explain what's going on, I'm losing sort of the mystery, the wonder, and allowing sort of my brain to come up with sort of almost emotional or visceral reasons of why this is happening, and allowing myself to create more sort of logic. But by having this one character explain to another character what's happening, like literally through like a 3-minute like voiceover kind of thing, it loses the sort of the mystery and the wonder. And
I think that's a really good point. Sorry.
Yeah.
Do you want to keep going? Okay, I just had sort of a flash of inspiration here. The cop figure, and I can't remember his name.
Kogawa?
In some ways, what's that?
I think it's Kogawa, but I might be wrong.
Kogawa. He's the character who has to be led around by Paprika, right? In the beginning instance, he's the character that needs therapy, and in order to reach his like therapeutic conclusion, he needs to be taught sort of the rules of the dream world, and Paprika's the one that does that. And so in some sense he represents us as the viewers, learning, the possibilities of the style of animation when we're thinking about the film in its formal aspect, but also like the workings of the subconscious. It's all sort of a metaphor for itself. What was I going to say? Oh shit, I think I just lost. Anyway, that is sort of an interesting way that they insert that desire, or they make a comment about the desire to impose a narrative on things, and then about breaking the ways that we can tell a story. I don't know. It's just so inventive that, I don't want to be stopped and told about it. At the same time, we are learning as we go, and there's a vehicle for us to do it. I think it's just very cleverly embedded, right? It's not through the dialogue. It's through showing us.
Yeah, it's one character watching another. Yeah, and I guess maybe that's just sort of like Christopher Nolan's a fantastic filmmaker, and I guess him in particular, at least in his more recent films, this is not my own idea, it's definitely Nathan's, and he sort of made me more aware of it. But I wish more filmmakers would sort of, first of all, like, be really brave about it and just being like, okay, because like even Quentin Tarantino talks about this, and like he makes fantastic films, right? He very rarely has his characters talk about the particular rules in his world, but it's just like he's like, which goes, God damn, what does he say exactly? It's something along the lines of like, I don't necessarily have to know all the rules of the world. I just have to know that you know all the rules of the world. And by meaning the filmmaker, right?
Yeah.
So he's saying, as a viewer, I don't need to know all the rules. I just need to know that you know. And I feel like this is exactly what I feel like with Satoshi Kon, and that's why. And like when you have, I guess I want more filmmakers to get to that state, because when you are, you can be more. You can take more risks. You can make something more interesting. And it's just where if we go into this sort of Hollywood thing where like everything has to be explained or we have to play safe, we lose the opportunity to do something really interesting, right? And I guess Paprika just sort of reopened that sort of sense. And because like the film The Martian's coming out, and I read some of it, and I actually I didn't feel like finishing it, which is the first time in a while. But like the first 100 pages, it was just Matt Damon now, literally explaining like Matt Damon.
Sorry, you have to, right?
His character basically explaining like, this is why I'm on Mars. This is why I'm stuck on Mars. This is what's gonna happen if I don't can't figure out how to cook or make food on Mars. This is how I'm gonna make food on Mars. This is why this works. This is why this exploded. This is why, and it's just like I don't.
Yeah.
And like on a film, it might work better because it can be visual and you can just see him do what he does on Earth, or on Mars. Because like basically you realize very quickly within like first 10 pages like he's stuck on Mars and he has to find a way to survive for like 5 years, and he only has supplies for like 6 months, etc., etc. And it's just like on a novel, like that's one of those things where I feel like it might be a good idea of an adaptation where it's like, okay, I don't know that it worked necessarily as great as a novel, but it might work better sort of told another story section. But anyways, the rules of the world, important. Be bold, just do it.
No, it is important, and I think animation is definitely like more sort of purely imaginative. And I don't want to get into anything where I say like absolutely it is, because you can have imaginative stuff with characters, and writing can always do different things than it's done before. And you can have two characters standing talking to each other, and it can be absolutely mind blowing, just the dialogue and the ways that they talk each other up and down and all over. Like The Sunset Limited, the Cormac McCarthy play or novel, short story that was adapted to Samuel L. Jackson and Tommy Lee Jones. Is it Tommy Lee Jones? Yeah.
Yeah, I've been told
I'm sitting in a room basically just the whole time, dialoguing. There can still be imaginative cruxes that will never happen again that are unique sort of thing in that context. But, oh boy. Yeah, I don't know. It could be just like, you're complaining about a convention of sort of Hollywood films that they need to make themselves explicit to the viewer so that the viewer feels smart, and they get everything that's going on. Because we go to films to be gratified, and I don't think that that's the best way to be entertained. Or at least sometimes you want to know what's going on, you want to feel like you're the master of the information, just like the character is, and it's all about like exceeding ourselves technologically, like with The Martian. Look at how it's basically like back to basics, but on a technologically advanced scale, making fire, and we want to be taken along with that and feel like we're smart. And to have like the psychology of dreaming and stuff explained in Inception does sort of the same thing to us, and plays upon our sort of pop culture, psychological self-assessment, like complex, Dr. Phil stuff.
Well, why don't we...
But I also prefer a movie that is confident in its imagination, or a writer and director or animator that is confident in the rules of creativity, and lets the thing unfold and says, I know you're going to be entertained. I don't need to know. And I don't know. It seems more creative to me.
Well, and I think there's more room for things that I haven't seen before. And like when I start to watch more and more films, I see more and more things, and then so that I think that's why I become more attached to films that are often usually animation. It's not the fact that I really like animation; it's just that there tends to be more new things for me there. But like what? Yeah. So why don't we go? Because you were sort of talking about being satisfied and all that sort of things. Let's sort of wrap the discussion up by talking about the ending of Paprika.
Sure.
And saying whether, because that's the part where I had some sort of, again with the whole eyebrow, like I don't know, kind of feeling.
And me as well. So
yeah. So the very specific, like the very specific part.
Specific, yeah.
The very specific part that I had some issues with is the moment that she turns into a little girl after like she goes into the robot with Tokashi. I'm terribly sorry, I forget the guy's name. But anyways, Paprika turns into this gigantic little baby, and she starts eating the dream. My confused, and I think the more than anything is I'm confused, and like most of some things happened, and I wasn't necessarily, and like I didn't know what was going on, but I wasn't confused. With this, I was unsure why she turned into a little baby, and why she could eat the dreams, and why now, and why that kills the bad guy. Right?
Yeah, I wasn't certain either. I
So
think they do this whole thing with the alter ego with Shiba and Paprika at the ending, where Paprika's like, you can't always control everybody. You have to learn your lesson. You have to let like the more expressive, animalistic, subconscious, desiring part of you take over sometimes and let it go. And somehow these two parts of her are supposed to come together. I don't think that was to come together and like fulfill each other, and then she's supposed to be the hero. I don't see how that figure would result in her becoming a little girl that eats the dream. I don't
yeah.
follow
It
the
just
logic there. I don't think that matters as much as the fact that throughout the film, Sheba has not been really characterized as a controlling figure who like meddles or wants to nitpick other people's lives and correct them and that sort of thing.
I
Not
do
enough, at least, to make
yeah.
it that dramatic at the end where they've got to come together to succeed.
So maybe that's my one sort of um, kind of issue with the film is that like when she's like I actually love this guy, I was sort of like okay, I guess, and I thought maybe I didn't see it totally like coming or like I didn't see the seeds there necessarily, but I'm like I also saw a lot of pretty colors and a lot of things flying around, so I may have missed it, and I think on the second way through, I think I may notice more clues, because she's especially mean to him, which is like the whole kindergarten thing of being like I'm mean because I love you, and I the idea that she actually loves this man, I think is interesting, and I think it can fit in this story. I just didn't see sort of necessarily the build up. I was like, okay, maybe I just missed the build up from all the wonderful, pretty things. Um,
Well, I think I
but
might have like one potential explanation for you.
okay,
And they like one of the themes of the film more generally is this anxious relationship with technology,
mm-hmm.
and especially as it relates to like therapy or fixing our deficiencies inside ourselves. So technology specifically that can get inside your head,
Mm-hmm.
and then once we're able to be manipulated from the inside, what are the ethics of that? Like what are the dangers of that, And so this figure, the gigantic fat creator, and
what is his name?
I can't. Tokita.
Tokita.
Tokita is like a childish figure throughout, right? He's got these vices. He eats. He consumes everything, and in the same way, his creation is totally unchecked. He takes everything into him, but he also just puts everything out without any sort of like ethical consideration, right?
Yeah.
So he builds a technology. He sees a dream. He dreams that we can dream together with each other, and he just wants access. And he's like,
Yeah, just
okay, I'll put my mind to it, right? There is no second consideration. And throughout, there's this like all these other characters are trying to negotiate this because they see it as a means of power, and he doesn't see that. I think he just sees like the purely creative aspect of it, and it's sort of described in terms of a fetish for the technology, and it's sort of also described in terms of like a childlike sense of wonder that he just he doesn't have any extra ego or superego trying to squash his pure like creative joy. And I think that's why she loves him. I think that's why she calls him the genius of the century, is because we need people like that. I don't know.
And like,
there's a possible explanation. I don't know if it's really true, but they definitely go some way towards making that argument.
Yeah, well, and I don't necessarily have the issue of her loving him. I actually think the image of like her pulling him out of the elevator and then just sort of sitting behind him.
Oh.
And like I think that's a really sort of warming image, at least for me, right? Like the hugging thing, and like maybe it's just because like when I cuddle, I like cuddling. I've done that positions kind of thing before. It's just there's something really nice about leaning on somebody that
There's like
way,
a
right?
bit too that she's wrapping up from behind.
Right? Yeah, and it's just there's something very like visceral about that image. Okay, um, my main concern is like, how does that translate into Paprika being like, she says something like light and dark, life and death, man and woman, and then she like flies into the robot, and then turns into a little girl. Like that right there is my like I don't get it. Like I just that's the one part where I'm like I don't. First, I don't get it, and that means I don't know. Either I'm dumb or the ending wasn't totally deserved, and it just feels maybe the ending or the solution to the ending was very sudden.
I think you're right. I think that what you're expressing is something that I felt also is that it was sort of arbitrary the way that it ended, right?
Yeah.
Like she could just have easily have chose the Sugawa is his name, the cop figure,
Yeah.
and fallen in love with him and had the redemption somehow be related to his internal redemption process or whatever. I think maybe it's the writers or the writer Satoshi Kon trying to be more sensitive to the theme of the danger of technology and what the place of creation is in a world where what we create can potentially like be destructive in some ways, or maybe what we create always was destructive in some ways. Anyway, so maybe that's him trying to say like this was actually the bigger theme or whatever. But I felt like that argument wasn't strong enough.
Yeah, it wasn't earned.
And so it felt sort of ambivalent, or how it actually happened, and I didn't understand why she was a child again. But the figure of the child is so overinvested anyway. So there are lots of things. Yeah, no, I think I agree with you. But there was so much going on. It had to end somehow, and this is as good an ending as I could imagine. I guess I don't think I could come up with anything better. Maybe.
Well, like I don't know. Like I would probably need a little more time than just like thinking of it on the spot, but like if you are gonna go with a seemingly arbitrary, and like I might just be totally missing the boat, and someone's gonna explain it to me, and I'm like I'm an idiot because it's happened before. But if I'm not completely missing the boat, I feel like even if you're just if you're going to come up with some sort of arbitrary, not arbitrary but sudden ending, I feel like something else could have happened, like almost anything else, like
almost anything else. Yeah, you're
right. Like she goes, you know what? You know how you stop a man trying to eat his, eat the world or eat dreams, or sorry, like spit his dreams everywhere. You love him, and then like she goes into his legs, and all of a sudden he can feel his legs again, and he's like, "Wow, I love everything. Oh my god, my legs are exploding!" And then there you go. It's the ending. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, my understanding of why this man was doing what he was doing in terms of like controlling dream world and all that stuff is that he lost control of his legs, and then in a very real or symbolic way he lost control of his life, his world, and like the way that he had the sort of the power that he felt he had before, or more than he had before, was going into the dream world. And I just feel like you could have, I don't know, dealt with that in some way, and it left that sort of the antagonist's journey sort of unchecked or unresolved rather.
Yeah.
And the ending.
Interesting figure.
Yeah.
Because the whole time he's talking about like we need watchmen. We can't just have pure unchecked creation. And then he's the one that ends up actually using the technology abusively.
Yeah. Which is interesting.
Power. Yeah.
And like it's like the film was sort of like we can't use a technology. Or like we can't abuse it. Oh, oops! I'm abusing it. Rah, rah. Like no one will stop me. You know what'll stop him? Love of two other people. Let me eat you. And it's just sort of like right. And I guess it was just like two people were having different conversations, and then all of a sudden they decide, oh, this one beats this one. And you're like, what? Oh, okay, sure.
Yeah,
but
I agree.
Literally everything else about the film was great. I loved it, and so like this is, and like I'm also not disregarding the idea that I might have just missed the boat, or that there's something that I'm not.
Maybe we'll have a part 2.
Yeah, that like I'm not totally, or I'm just kind of missing some sort of vital piece. And even then, like for me, normally the point of a film is the ending, and if the ending is not satisfying, the film inherently for me does not work and doesn't really deserve to be called a masterpiece, whatever. I'm not. Things are not really going to stop me to say like this is still basically a masterpiece to me. Um, if nothing else, everything else is just so fascinating and so interesting. Um, and I think the themes that it does handle and talk about and the questions it raises are still super interesting. That even if it doesn't necessarily answer them or pose or sort of handle them well in the last, say, like minute and a half, I still think this is a wonderful film for me, anyways. And like that, it's weird. As a whole, I'm very satisfied with this film, and I would love to, like next time I see you in person, like we could watch this film, and I feel like I would be happy to do so. I'm satisfied by the film as a whole, but I'm not really satisfied by the ending, which is a huge rarity for me. It's usually like if the ending's not satisfying, I can't be satisfied as a whole.
No, you're so right. Yeah, I think the ending does fit with everything else. It happens so quickly that it almost like it's over so quickly that you don't have that much time to be super upset about it.
Yeah.
And there's sort of a denouement that's more satisfying with the Sagoa. That's better, more holistic in some ways, but it doesn't seem to be the main plot point. It's not the massive critical crux that like affects the whole world. It's just him like sort of finding a measure of inner peace or whatever, and that's actually more satisfying to me. The come down after the world.
Yeah, me too, actually.
The world-threatening incident, which is interesting as well. But anyway, that happens so quickly that it's like, oh, they had to get out of it somehow, and the rest of the film is so fantastic and does so many things that probably never happen again to me.
Yeah. Torin?
Took my rating completely.
We lost you there in the last 15 seconds.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. So, wait, did you say anything worth repeating?
No, I didn't say. I never.
All right. Yeah. I mean, there was something I was gonna say that was sort of important, but clearly not important enough.
There you go.
The last thing I was gonna say is like, I think one of the things that this film also does quite well is it doesn't overstay its welcome, because I could see this. If there's like 2 hours, 15 minutes of just like everything that it's doing, I could see this film overstaying its welcome, and I'm almost okay with taking this ending and knowing that it's a nice, succinct sort of like 90 minutes kind of thing.
Yes.
I'm okay with that, and I feel like the pace of this stuff is sort of worth. It's not worth sort of the kind of unsatisfying ending, but it's an okay trade off for me. If like that was what the filmmaker ended up doing. Other than that, do you have any last comments before we say goodbye to the internet?
No, I'd just be reiterating what you said. I would just want to say, go watch this film. You're gonna like it. It's fascinating. The writing is really great. The visual style is so compelling. You're never gonna see anything like it probably again, unless you watch Inception and you notice the similarities. I don't know, but it's great. Go watch this film. It's an hour and a half. It's the best way to spend an hour and a half if you don't have anything else to do, which often you don't. Let's be real.
I'd be very surprised if you watched this and hadn't seen the film yet. I'm a little disappointed in you because you should have spent the 43 minutes or so watching the film instead of listening to us talking about it. But even if you did for some weird reason, we probably still did not do the film justice. So go watch it. Until next time. Again, this is another episode of QQ. My name is Paul Weston. I'm committing.
Coming from Montreal this time. Just
moved.
All right,
still in the same place for me. But hopefully, Torin and I are going to be doing a few more of these more regularly now that our schedule's a little more in tune. Anyway, guys, take care. Bye.
And gals, and in between.